We're getting closer and closer to the Culture Proof Conference 2024, and we could not be more excited.
Yes, it's a great time for the whole family, a great time of ministry, mothers, fathers, uncles, aunts, grandparents, everybody, the kids. We have something for them as well. Of course, we have the Culture Proof kids, Culture Proof teens. They're going to have some great speakers. It's going to be led by our Maria Hamilton, the third. And also Mark and Amy Warren. And so,
that's right,
man, the kids are going to be equipped, and you can have some great discussions and conversations with them as you head back home.
We are so excited. This year's conference is hosted by Faith Baptist Church in Bartlett, Tennessee. When registration opens, you will be among the first to know. If you go to cultureproof.net, make sure you join our email list, because we are going to blast out open registration to that list first. If you are a part of that email list, you will be among the first to register. And rumor has it that there's a special treat involved for those who register early. So stay connected, cultureproof.net, cultureproof.net. We're super excited about our guests who are all joining to talk about one thing: resisting the cultural trends that rival the truth. We're going to be talking about the ways that we can remain culture proof, from scientific apologetics, biblical apologetics, cultural apologetics. How do we live in this world as faithful followers of Christ? We're going to target every age group, so make sure you show up and bring your entire family.
Yes, we're going to have a great lineup of speakers, which you'll be able to view their bios on the website, cultureproof.net. Once you go on, Abraham Hamilton III, Miki Addison. We're going to have Dr. Jason Lau, Dr. Kathy Cook, and others.
Dr. Renton Rathbun, Dr. Lee Brand. We are super excited. Dr. Taryn Dames. I feel like by next conference, I'm going to also have my doctorate, just because it kind of flows. Anyway, we're super excited about what the Lord is doing, and we want you to join us. The Culture Proof Conference happening July 18th through the 20th at Faith Baptist Church in Bartlett, Tennessee. Stay connected, because more information about that is rolling out just around the corner. You're going to find that at cultureproof.net, cultureproof.net. Make sure you join the email list. We can't wait. Thanks for checking out Culture Proof. I'm Miki.
And I'm Will.
And today we're talking about the making of radicals, how American education borrows from dictators to rob us of our children and create the foot soldiers that they need to carry out their devious plan of world domination. And I know that sounds a little bit like Looney Tunes Adventures, but that's the reality of the world that we are living in. In fact, it was Karl Marx who famously said the education of all children from the moment that they can get along without a mother's care shall be in state institutions. There is a reason that these infamous dictators have all had their sights trained on children. And there's a reason why, even in the United States of America, education is so important. We see the results of years of indoctrination all across this country. And it's most pronounced in the last few weeks, where we have had these breakouts, if you will, of protesters and encampments being set up on, liberal universities all across this country. I think the one that probably has garnered the most attention is Columbia University, only because it's no stranger to these types of protests, these types of demonstrations. But we want to talk about how all of this is by design, really. And the aim is to rob us of our children. And I know that sounds sensational, but at some point you've got to put all of the facts together and say, it is what it is. And we do see what we see.
Yeah, definitely. When you see these things happening, you can't just start with what you see right now. It's like a long game. There's been things that have happened over years to get us to this point. So the young people that we see protesting, and a lot of them seem like they don't know what they're protesting about. It's amazing to watch. You got to understand that they've been fashioned in this way.
My goodness.
And you mentioned that quote, man, it's something how they understand that about needing the children and how important it is from the youngest age possible to have their minds. But it seems like we in the body of Christ, don't understand that,
Yeah.
you know.
Yeah.
And it's amazing because they understand it and they go after it.
Yep.
They put everything behind it to get the
Man.
children, and man, they see
And
the
keep them
value
for
of
as
it
long as
as
possible
long as
to
possible and to
get
start as
them. Yeah.
early as possible.
That's exactly right. And that's why we have taken an active and upfront role in the education of our kids. I think this is the perfect time to remind our listeners that Culture Proof is sponsored by our premier sponsor, BJU Press Homeschool. We are very proud of the work that BJU Press Homeschool is doing to educate kids and to help shape a biblical worldview that is going to stand up to the pushback that our kids are going to receive in this country. Listen, we are far past our Mayberry days. And so we have got to raise our kids to be able to stand in the culture that they are growing up in. And we are doing that with the help of bjupresshomeschool.com. We want to encourage you to check out our friends, see if this curriculum is something that you will benefit from. If you are set on making sure that you preserve a biblical worldview in your kids, then we cannot recommend more highly bjupresshomeschool.com. Those are our friends. And you can tell them that the Addisons sent you. bjupresshomeschool.com, the premier sponsors of the Culture Proof podcast. All right. So we're talking about the making of radicals.
Yes.
And one of the things that really strikes me as I look at what is happening, on college campuses across this country, it seems that there's, there are these cycles of protests that happen where you're like, oh my goodness, like what is going on? And you know that these types of demonstrations can only happen among people who are living at a certain stage of life.
Yeah.
That is to say, they don't have one. It is that I'm sorry. I know that's disrespectful, but I mean, they don't have people that they are responsible for. Largely what you have is people are responsible for them.
Yeah.
They are not responsible for other people. And that's necessary, right? Because you need people who are going to be able to set up tents on their college campus. You need people who are going to be able to go 2 weeks and say, this is a starvation protest. Like same thing. This happened on Columbia's campus back in 1996. And I think most famously in 1968, there was the occupation of the same Hamilton Hall that we're reading about, that students tried to occupy last week, and police were called in. And now there's this huge dust up about, these were peaceful protests. Well, they weren't, right? Because you go into the building in the aftermath of that and you see how they destroyed the building. So these are not peaceful protests. And
Right.
we're going to show you a clip courtesy of Libs of TikTok, just to show that people don't even understand what peaceful protests are. They don't understand even what their First Amendment rights are. But all of that is to say, there is something about using the strength of a young person to carry out goals and objectives,
That's
right?
That's right.
There's something about saying these young people, if they are zealous about something, they are going to see it through to the end. They don't have to worry about counting too much of the cost of their involvement, because frankly, they don't have a whole lot to lose, at least not in their minds.
Yeah.
And so what we want to say today is not just to kind of run through a list of, here's where the protests have broken out, here are the numbers. Like really what we are interested in is the spiritual implication of what we see happening through these young people.
Yeah.
And I think to say it simply, what we know and what we can be certain of is that there is great usefulness. There is great usefulness for young people. And every dictator that has ever strolled this earth understood that. Every dictator set out to grab young people. We are going to share with you a series of quotes that some of them you have probably heard before. But I think thinking about these things in light of what we see happening ongoingly in our country is so important, because it helps to refocus like where we need to, show up to fight.
Yeah.
And the chief location that we need to show up and fight is in our homes for our children, making sure to preserve their minds and make them useful for God and not Satan. Because I'm telling you, the enemy truly, and I know this sounds sensational, maybe even a little bit, hyperbolic when I say that the enemy is after our children, but there is just no other way to say it. To have statements about the need for kids to be educated by the state, to say that all I need is 4 years, or give me a 4-year-old, look, the revelation of the usefulness of children is not something that should be surprising to us.
No, not at all. Because you're dealing with time, you're dealing with energy, And that's what young people have. and
Yeah,
and I
yeah.
think that it's understood by dictators and people who have certain agendas. And man, if we can get them passionate and in an uproar about something, even if they don't fully understand what's going on, but we can get them passionate about it, we can get our things done, or we can wreak havoc. And so you have wicked men and wicked women who will take advantage of those type of things,
Mm,
for their own agendas and their own things that they're trying to push. But at the same time, we need to take a look and take a lesson from that as Christians and say, man, we have to make sure that we are with our children in our homes,
yes.
setting them on a firm foundation of Jesus Christ and the Word of God. Because in the same way, if they are passionate about that, they
Yes.
will do things that will change this world for the glory of God.
Amen.
We got to see it as, man, there's something about that age group. There's something about young children. There's something, because it's a dead giveaway if the world is like pressing to get them.
Yes. Yes.
That's a dead giveaway. We should say, okay, man, so what do they? Oh, what the word tells us, what
Yeah.
they see strength. They
Yes.
see an
Amen.
ability to work and to do some things because
Hmm.
they're able bodied, and they're at a stage where they can be passionate about things and put their energies into things. Why not, into the things of God?
Yeah, yeah. I think it's so important that you draw that out. And as we continue, just kind of working through what we're looking at and what we have seen historically, I think it's going to be so important for us to draw in scripture and to show that God reveals to us that there is something that we should seek to harness in our young people. Now, look, I do believe that we should be outraged at what we see as almost sort of like the mindless carousel type behavior of our kids. You know what I mean? That they're just kind of going around
Yeah.
because the person in front of them is going around, right? And so they just continue following. Yes, we should be outraged when we see that happening, but we should also recognize that this exists because of a vacuum of leadership on the
Mm,
part of parents. Kids have an incredible amount of potential, and the Lord has instructed us to harness and to
mm,
shape that for His glory. But when we abdicate our role and we take a step back from that, then what we are saying is basically we have no use for that. We
mm.
we don't see the value in that, and it's almost sort of like the person out in the market who says, "Oh, it's worthless," and then gets it for a cheap price, and then walks away like rejoicing over how he has swindled you.
Right.
I feel like that's how our culture has done with our
Wow.
kids.
Wow.
Oh, you don't need to be bogged down with children.
Mm.
You don't need to, limit yourself because you've got children. You know what? I tell you what we'll do. We'll take them off your hands. Oh, don't worry about it. We'll give you a good 7 to 8 hours every day to yourself. You can have some me time. Don't even worry about it because, you don't want to deal with these children. And then we say, oh, really? And you say, and I don't even have to pay anything, like I don't have to do. No, we'll take them for you. And so then they walk away smiling. Why? Because now they have the future.
Mm.
Because now they have the future because we didn't think it was important enough to sacrifice, to invest in them. We didn't understand the value of what God had entrusted to us. And
Yeah.
that's how we get radicals.
Hmm.
Again, I know that sounds hyperbolic, but please understand that a lot of the radicals that we research, that we study, when we, look back at the Weather Underground, Bill Ayers,
Mhm.
when you think of, oh my goodness, I'm thinking of the woman, Bill Ayers' wife,
Oh,
Dorn,
Dorn.
Bernadine Dorn.
Bernardine
Is
Dorn.
is that the
Yes,
right name?
that's
Okay.
right.
These people were young when they started,
Right.
and oh my goodness, Bernadine Dorn is like 80 something years old now, and
Right. Right.
still kicking. So is Bill Ayers, and you think about when they started, you know, 28 years old,
Mm.
26 years old, they're young. Why? Because there is something about that zeal in a young person that if you can harness that, whatever it is that they feel passionate about, right? They're going to keep going with that. They're going
Mm.
to see that through to the end. And that is happening repeatedly, I would say, in every generation.
Yeah. Yeah.
One of the things that came to my mind, and before I kind of get into this piece,
Mhm.
was an article that you and I actually ran across on history.com. I think it was a history.com article. And I remember us discussing this with our children a few years back, looking at how Hitler's strategy for building his army totally revolved around taking the youth
Mm-hmm.
and turning them into his soldiers without their even knowing it, right?
Mm-hmm.
So he, essentially outlawed the Boy Scouts and then turned those kids who would be involved in the Boy Scouts into what he called the Hitler Youth, right? And why was he doing this? Essentially to wrestle these young people away from their parents. By the way, they also had something for girls as well, but the soldiers would become the young boys who
Yeah.
would be wrestled away from their parents.
Yeah, definitely. Once again, you see someone with bad intentions understanding the value of children
Yes.
and doing something to really get to their minds. There's an indoctrination program. If you can raise them up in that way, it will be hard for them, even if they, didn't submit to those things anymore, to get that out of their
Yes,
system.
that's right.
You know
That's
what I'm
right.
saying? And so, man, there's something there that we have to understand as believers.
Mhm.
There's a strategy, and that again used for the kingdom of God, man, it could yield such a results, man, that the kingdom of God would be unstoppable here on the earth. Because the thing is, God has given us our children as arrows to be shot out into this
Mm.
culture, into this world, but we have to be those skilled archers to shoot them out. So that takes intention, that
That's
takes
right.
skill. It takes a intentional effort to reach them. And
Mm.
so that's what these wicked men and wicked women, that's what they did,
Yeah.
and they saw a lot of success for what they wanted because of it. But in the same way, God is like, no, I've given them to you,
Yes.
and you are the ones that are supposed to disciple them and raise them up, so that they can have an effect for me in this world.
And I'm thinking about something you just said in the illustration you use that you've taken directly from scripture. Like hands or like arrows in the hands of a warrior
Mhm.
are sons born in one's youth.
One's you. Yep.
I'm thinking about that. Like if you think about a skilled archer, he doesn't just run about talking about he has arrows.
Mm. Right.
I've got
Right.
arrows. I've got
Right.
arrows.
Like
It's like,
so.
okay. And like, what's your point?
Right.
But a skilled archer has to train to
Mm.
become a skilled archer.
Mm.
So that means that he has to learn how to use the bow and use the arrows, how to shoot the arrows
Mhm.
with great intention, like how to be focused and to care about where that
Mhm.
arrow is going to land.
Right.
And I think about as parents, man, we too are tasked with, not just running around.
That's
I've
it.
got children.
That's
I've
it.
got
That's it.
kids. It's like, so what are we doing with those kids as
Because
we
the
send them out
the
into the
skilled
world?
archer and the one who has those arrows, they're trying to hit a target.
That's
That
right.
takes
Yes.
practice. That
Amen.
takes some intention.
Yes.
I'm trying to hit this target. So it's not just, I have these arrows or I'm just shooting just to shoot. No, I'm aiming at something that I'm trying to hit.
Yes. Oh, it's so good. Okay. So here is the piece. We read this a few years ago with our kids and just talked to them about the importance of, living in a culture that seeks to wrestle you away from your parents. And it was very eye opening for them to understand that the things that we share with them, the desire for them as young people, that it is something that is documented and that it's not just coming from the mind of their parents, But here's the article. It begins this way: from Boy Scouts to Hitler Youth. It was 1937, and the Boy Scouts were one of many youth organizations on the Nazis' verboten list. Now, every non-Jewish boy in Germany was required to be part of the Hitler Youth, the Nazis' youth arm. Instead, the Hitler Youth was a group designed to indoctrinate kids into Hitler's ideology. Okay, so I didn't read that well. Let me run a highlighter over what I just said. So instead of boys being allowed to be a part of Boy Scouts, they had to be a part of the Hitler Youth.
Yeah.
And this was, basically this was Hitler's indoctrination arm. This was his camp to make boys ready to ultimately be his fighting soldiers, his footmen. And he actually, you read history, he actually did go on to send some of these boys out basically to die on the front lines of a war they could not have understood, because all they had learned was that they were to serve the Fuhrer. Okay. So there was one guy, and I may be getting ahead of myself here, who was interviewed in the 1980s, and he was a part of the Hitler Youth, and a grown man interviewed. And he said, even looking back on that, it was so hard for him to get rid of everything that he had learned. He said, and I want to quote from memory, he said, "My heart and soul belong to the Fuhrer." Like, if you think about that, like, my body and my soul. I think he said my body and my soul belong to the Führer. And so that's the power, right, of indoctrination.
Yeah.
Okay, back to this article. By the time Adolf Hitler came to power in 1933, hundreds of thousands of kids were members of youth organizations like Boy Scouts, which was invented in England in 1909 and quickly spread to Germany. But there was also another powerful youth movement afoot, one invented by the Nazis. Since 1922, the National Socialists had a youth arm designed to train and recruit members for its paramilitary. As the Nazis became more powerful, their youth arm grew. In January 1933, there were 50,000 members of the Hitler Youth. By the end of the year, there were more than 2 million.
Wow.
Okay, I'm going to continue. And as the 1930s progressed, the Nazis waged war on the groups so popular among German youth. So in other words, they banned organizations like the Boy Scouts and then funneled all of the boys into the Hitler Youth Organization. So for parents who refused to sign their kids up, they had to go to these re-education camps. Sound familiar? Sometimes the parents were fined. Sometimes the parents served jail time. Wow. Okay, if they did not comply. All right, so here we go. Banning scouting sent a message: obey or be punished. It had a practical effect too. Since other scouting organizations were banned, the only way for kids to get scouting experience was to join the Hitler Youth. In other words, wherever there's a vacuum, now, of course, we're talking about Boy Scouts before it was essentially taken over, which, is a whole other podcast that we could do, right? But wherever there is sort of like a vacuum, right? You say you can't be a part of this that is wholesome, but you can be a part of this. You can't do this that is wholesome, but you can do this. Yeah. Or in the case of the Hitler Youth, you will do this. All right. For the Nazis, this group, the Hitler Youth, had other benefits. Not only did it allow the Third Reich to indoctrinate children at their most impressionable. Okay, but lean in for this part, right? So not only did the Hitler Youth allow for the Nazis to indoctrinate these kids, but it let the Nazis remove them from the influence of their parents. Now, this is from history.com. Okay, this is from the History Channel, right? This is the History Channel. So the History Channel is not sort of like, a vault for Christian conservatism. Okay.
Right.
But the History Channel ran this piece because this is the reality of what the Nazis were doing. Again, back to this. It let the Nazis remove the children from the influence of their parents, some of whom opposed the regime. The Nazi Party knew that families, private, cohesive groups, not usually under political sway, were an obstacle to their goals. The Hitler Youth was a way to get Hitler's ideology into the family unit. And some members of the Hitler Youth even denounced their parents when they behaved in ways not approved of by the Reich. Now, I want you to think about, now, again, when I'm looking at things like this that have happened, in the history of civilization, and I'm looking at some of the tactics that have been used, we would look at these things and we would say, man, these were wicked tactics. Okay, so who would be the author of these tactics? Okay, the enemy, right? Yeah. Satan. So then I think, well, when I see this replicated in today's culture,
same enemy.
It's not like he's repackaged some brand new strategy. Right. He's just using the same strategy that has worked to deceive men, that has worked to grow wickedness, to grow his kingdom, because that is what we're talking about. We're talking about being in a battle of kingdoms. Okay. And the spoils of this battle is the souls of men. That's what we're talking about when we're talking about where is the victory, right? So you think about this. How do you build darkness? How do you build a kingdom in rebellion against God? Okay, you're going to make converts one way or the other. Right. You're going to take young, impressionable children. You're going to turn them against their parents, the parents who are the first line of defense. Okay, you're going to turn them against their parents. And then what you're going to do is you're going to tell them, these are your new thoughts. Go think them.
Yeah.
And these are the actions that are the results of those thoughts. Now go do them. And we see this exact same thing happening in 21st century America. You see the attempt to wrestle kids away from their parents, to give them a
Mm-hmm.
new parental system, right? Where you have what is commonly called glitter families, okay? Or we have an education system that says, you know what, between the hours of 7:15 and 3:15, your kids belong to us,
Mm.
i.e., the state. You can have no influence over those kids. That's a lie. But that is what you are supposed to believe. And why? So that the state creates these happy little followers
Mm-hmm.
who just do what they're told, think what they're told to think, and feel what they are told to feel. And
Mm.
they even at times, and we have seen this, they even at times turn against their own parents.
Wow. Yeah, that's true. That's true. And you see that so clearly, within our culture today, the authority being wrestled away from the parents. That is an intentional thing,
Mm.
and it's like you said, it's a scheme of the enemy. Did the same thing years and years ago. Same thing happening today,
Mhm.
and I think we have to be discerning as believers and not just, look at these things and say, "Oh man, that's terrible." No, so what are we going to do about it?
Yeah, that's it.
What kind of action is it moving us towards?
Yeah.
And that's the thing. We can see certain things, and if we're not saying, okay, where do I need to change? What do I need to do? Then man, what's the point? We're doing nothing, so as we're seeing these things, it should light a fire within us to disciple our children. It should light a fire within us for the children that's in our churches and in
Yeah.
our neighborhoods or whatever, to be able to say, man, what can I do for those who are followers of Christ, that make sure that they are not consumed by these mindsets, and so they're desiring to have our children,
Mhm.
they're pressing. It's not a passive thing,
That's right.
but a lot of times we on our side, we're passive. We're just looking on, and we almost like we're not sure of what to do, when the word of
Mm.
God shows us and tells us exactly how we're supposed to combat, what's going on
That's right.
in the world. We do that in this context through discipleship right in
Amen.
our homes.
That's it. And it's you're so spot on in that I think there's an unnecessary deer in headlights type look that often comes from parents, like, as if we don't have our marching orders, we don't know what to do,
Yeah.
when in fact it's already been made clear to us. I'll tell you something else that we're doing. We are hosting a conference this summer
Yes.
for families, and this is an intergenerational
That's
conference
right.
that you are invited to attend. Look, we've got to be equipped. This goes into the category of not just saying I have arrows, but getting equipped and getting trained
Mm,
on how to shoot those arrows out. You think
that's right.
about the time that we're living in now and how we're going to navigate this time that the Lord has seen fit to cause us to live in. How are we
Mm,
going to navigate that for his glory? Well, we want to help you with that. So we invite you to join us for the Culture Proof Conference 2024. It's
that's right.
happening in Bartlett, Tennessee, July 18th through the 20th.
Hmm.
We know that you're going to be equipped. Like, there's no reason. I just don't know people who want to organize a conference just to have something to do.
Mm.
It's a lot of work.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
But I can tell you that it is worth it. We have been hosting a family conference since 2018. And the
Hmm.
reason we started doing this was because we saw the great need to equip parents and grandparents and children
Hmm.
to be able to stand up for the ardent faith that we have received one time for all.
Mm,
There is just the one faith.
mm,
And so this conference is a multi-generational apologetics conference. We want to equip you to stand in the culture that you're living in. So we are bringing in guests like Dr. Renton Rathbun,
mhm.
who is the director of the Center for Biblical Worldview at Bob Jones University.
Hmm. Yeah, and to think about it, I want to mention some of our other speakers, but I was thinking about something in researching for the topic that we're talking about today. How I think it was Bill Ayers, Bernadine Dorn,
Mhm.
how they were talking about how they would organize on campus,
Yes.
and they would get signatures, and they were out there doing. And I'm like, man, man, on the side of the body of Christ, we have to have that same type of
Man,
aggression,
it's so true.
with doing things, yes, praying and seeking God, but doing the things that we can do. And the conference is a thing that we can do. We want to help to equip the body of Christ to be able to answer these questions of the day. We have our culture proof kids,
Hmm.
culture proof teens. We want to equip them as well. We're bringing in great speakers, Abraham Hamilton III, Terren Dames, Dr. Lee Brand, just a whole host of speakers, not just to come hear good speakers, but to be equipped
Yeah.
for this battle that we're in. We have to be aggressive. We have to be passionate, because this all for all the marbles,
Yeah, it is for all the marbles. And I want to tell you something that is very important to us in the way that we structure and organize our family conferences. We don't just pick popular names.
Hmm.
We don't, read headlines to see who other people are going to hear. We like to invite people who are putting in the work
Yeah.
and doing the groundwork right now in real
Yes.
time, that we know are going to be able to actively challenge and actively equip you to do the same.
That's right.
And it just so happens that they are doing these at a pretty large capacity oftentimes. I mean, look, not many of us are going to direct centers for biblical worldview. We are not going to direct creation centers. I'm thinking about Dr. Jason Lyle.
Yes.
But all of this is necessary as we are all equipped
Mm.
to stand,
Yes.
especially in the wicked time that we're living in. We would love to see you in Bartlett, Tennessee, July
Mhm.
18th through the 20th. You can learn more about the Culture Proof Conference by going to cultureproof.net.
That's
That
right.
is cultureproof.net.
That's right.
Look, the time is out for um, just throwing up our sticks and hoping that they land in the formation that we want.
Mm.
I feel like that's
Yeah.
what we have done with our kids. We have said,
Mm.
well, I hope they'll be okay. Won't they? I hope
Mm.
they'll be okay. Won't they? When we can be really intentional about what we're doing. We started off this podcast episode talking about how our culture has made radicals by just taking pages from the playbooks of dictators,
Yeah.
right? Like they have had goals and objectives that are well documented. Their quotes, right,
Mm.
are well documented, what they sought to do. And we want to share just a few of those on this particular episode in light of what we see happening on college campuses all across this country. Because believe it or not, this is not going to be the last time. I remember the Occupy Wall Street
Mhm.
protests.
Mhm.
And unfortunately, I did make jokes about that. Like, when are they taking showers? Like, when are they going home? But you quickly realize that these are people who have been hired,
Yep.
which is the same thing that's happening with these campus protests. It's interesting. So, like, if you look at the 1968 protest at Columbia University, which I guess probably is like the genesis of Columbia University becoming known as a campus for this kind of like hotbed protest, right? So you've got the footage that comes out in 1968 where you do have the kids protesting. You do see them kind of like sitting out on the lawns and all of this, but you don't see tents. Like I don't see tents. And I'm like, how do you get these uniform tents where they all they're like, it's like they made a little subdivision overnight.
Yeah.
Who's behind that?
Mm.
And what we now know is that when they stormed Hamilton Hall over there on Columbia University's campus, we now know that many of them were not even students.
Mm.
Many of them were so-called operatives who had come in to not only tell the students how to storm the building, but to storm the building with them. So what we are facing is not just organic rebellion, if you want to call it that.
Mhm.
What we are facing truly are the roots of organized rebellion in our country with the aim to topple our institutions. This is
Mhm.
still the work ongoingly.
Yeah, definitely. And we know that there's some sinister actors behind this stuff. There's some money that's coming from
For
places,
sure.
to fund this disruption on campus. Man, it's amazing. But at the same time, again, as a Christian, I look at these things and I say, okay, for me and for mine, what do I need to do?
Yeah.
What is God calling me to do with the young people in my life? And the thing is, I always feel, man, I need to be more intentional. I need to do more. And I feel like we do on the side of Christ. We need to do more,
Yeah.
and I feel like there have been a passiveness, and just kind of looking at things and they'll be fine. No, it takes all of that.
It does, and probably some
And
that we're
probably
not doing.
more. Like honestly, and this kind of thing should wake us up
Mhm.
and should cause us to think very carefully
Yeah.
about what we're doing in our homes.
Yeah, with great sobriety too,
Yeah.
with understanding the urgency of the moment that we're in. Again, I think it's very easy for us to detach ourselves from these campus protests and just kind of look at them and to say, "Oh my goodness, these poor misguided young people," and look at them, maybe even some people just calling them crazy liberals and crazy radicals. But I got to tell you, somewhere in this country, if not in many places in this country, there are some parents who are grieved in their homes because they never expected this to be the outcome of their kid.
Yeah.
I mean, you think about it, they raise their kids. They raise their kids with strong Christian conviction. They raise their kid to honor the Lord in everything that they say and do. And then they sent that kid out thinking that just telling was enough. Right. And then the kid happens among people who say, well, I'm going to tell you this instead. And then also I'm going to show you how to do what I'm telling you. And then the result is just this.
Yeah.
I want to show you this. I watched, I was reading an article, and embedded in the article was an interview that the Associated Press had conducted with a student who is actually a part of the protests on Columbia University's campus. And she made a point. Actually, she made a few points that I thought were really good. And I thought, man, I don't want this to be missed by a larger audience, And so I thought, man, we really need to bring it to the Culture Proof audience. But she was talking about, when there's a discussion about, the outrage on Columbia's campus and, why is this happening and why are people showing up? She says, this is what we are taught. She goes, this is what is in some of our classes that are mandatory. So she's like, we can't really forget that this is what is expected of us. But now she's saying that the university is sort of, presenting as if, oh my goodness, we don't know why this is happening. But what I took from what she's saying, and we'll play the clip, what I took from what she's saying is that this is a part of the DNA of Columbia University.
Wow.
And in fact, they celebrate that this is where the protests of 1968 happened, and 1975 and 1980, 1983. I may be getting that date wrong. I'll look it up. But 1996. I mean, if you look at it, I was reading an article that kind of went through the decades where there was a campus outbreak of protest at Columbia University, and all of them happening in the month of April. I don't know what yes, I don't know what the significance, isn't that crazy?
Wow.
I don't know what the significance of that is. But I thought it was interesting to note. Okay, let me just play this clip. I've actually pulled two clips from her because I thought she said something, one that was informative, and then two that was honestly just kind of chilling to hear. But this is the one that I think is informative and helpful for us to understand as we watch what's happening over on Columbia University's campus.
Like the theory of disruptive protest, but not in an actuality, because we do, again, learn this in several of our classes, some of which being required at this university, but are not able to take that theory, what we've been told is right and just, and actually apply it. The university has put an emphasis on it, and because of that, the students have internalized that, realized that we have not only the privilege, but the responsibility to continue in the shoes of those who came before us, not necessarily all using the same tactics, but ensuring that we're able to maintain the integrity of this university as one that is indeed socially aware, one that does have students that do care deeply about what goes on in the world, what goes on in our communities, and what goes on in the lives of the students that make up our community.
So essentially what she's saying is that these are classes that are like mandatory classes for us to take, that we would remember the legacy we have of protesting and of resisting. And so she says maybe what they have wanted is for us to learn that these things happen, but not to imbibe that this would be our strategy. This would be what we would need to do from what we learn in these classes. And she is saying that this is the natural outflow of the indoctrination. This is what we are taught. So I don't know why they didn't expect us to continue doing these things. I mean, I just think that's really chilling.
Yeah, I think they do expect them to do these things. I think it's planned that way. I think some of these former activists that had become professors in the universities that they attended. You know, I believe they had it in their mindset. They wanted to train up the next generation of people who would be activists in
Yeah.
that way. Even if it was like, you know, we're just telling what happened. We're just, you know, man, I think that a lot of these people are still activists at heart.
Yes,
You
yes.
know?
And let me say this. So on a campus like Columbia University, not only are they still activists at heart, right? But you've got some of these people who participated in these protests in years gone by.
Mhm.
They go back into the university and become
Right.
professors.
Right.
So this is what they would do if they were not in their 70s.
Right.
You know, this is what they would do if they were not in their 80s. They love this. This is what they are hoping that these students would do.
Yes.
And I'll tell you, furthermore, they're hoping that what these students ultimately do is, by way of the university, topple the country. Like,
Mhm.
this is a part of that long march through the institutions, right? Like, this
Mhm.
is a part of that. We're going to take every sector of American culture and we're going to turn it upside down.
Yeah.
And so the liberal university is just another part of that.
Yeah. If you are an activist, in my mind, the prime place for you to be is as a professor at a university.
Yes.
You know, that seemed like that would be what you would want, because
Yes.
you understand the passion and the energy and the desire of young people,
Mhm.
because you were there and you were mobilized by somebody, you know. And so to go back and to teach these things, that would be like a priority on my list if I was an activist in that way, you know. And so again, we can take those things and say, okay, as believers, this should be the passion that we have with sharing the gospel with young people.
Yes.
With making sure that they're are rooted and grounded, that they have the solid foundation. Because if they really are captured by the Lord Jesus Christ, man, they're going to do mighty exploits.
Man, you know, this goes back to the point, and something that you have lamented for a long time, when you hear people say, well, I've raised my children.
Yeah. Yep.
I don't have a dog in this race anymore. I don't need to worry about it. I'm so glad that my kid, man, it grieves me even just thinking about it, right? Like, I'm so glad that my kids are not growing up in this generation, when you've got very wicked people who can't wait to turn around and train the next generation.
Right.
They will train their kids, and then they will train your kids, and they will train their kids, your kids' kids, the point that I'm making.
Yeah.
And they will never tire. Look, I look at Bernadine Dorn, and by the way, and I can't recommend it, but I'm fascinated by a recent podcast that sort of goes behind the scenes of the Weather Underground and how they started, and a lot of these radicals, and outlines how they were radicalized, right? She is 81, 82 years old now. Okay, first of all, okay, the longevity of that. Second of all, she's just out, you know, like living life. You know, her son is married to a woman who is a professor at a university. You know, you've got Bill Ayers, who is still working with young people. Like, these people have not like tired of the work they're doing because they believe it's a good work. Let me say that again. The radicals in America have not tired of the work they're doing because they believe it's a good work.
Yeah.
So what do we believe about discipling and training and equipping the next generation, which, by the way, is with us right now? What do we actually believe about that? Do we not believe it's a good work? You know, if you talk to somebody who says to you, I'm just gonna issue this challenge, okay? All right. If you talk to someone, whoever says to you, oh, I'm so glad that I don't have to raise kids in this climate, I hope that you will turn that comment around very quickly and say, man, what a blessing to be able to help the next generation. So what are you doing? What are you doing?
That's good.
If the stakes are high, what are you doing? I mean, you look, and I mentioned this before, this article here grabbed my attention. This was from the Times of Israel, and it talked about how on Columbia's campus, they have a history of these types of protests. And I mentioned that I should have said almost all of them happened in April, but I do have the dates for you. So it's in 1968. On April 23rd, 1968, you got protests that kick off protesting the Vietnam War. Then you fast forward in 1972. In 1972, students locked themselves inside Hamilton Hall. Here is this building, okay, for 1 week in April in 1972, during more anti-war protests. They used furniture to barricade the doors. Then in 1985, you've got 150 students who blockaded Hamilton Hall for nearly 3 weeks in April. Now, I don't know. Okay, in 1996, you've got about 100 students who occupied Hamilton Hall for 4 days to demand the university create an ethnic studies department. Okay, look, here's the point that I'm making. This is something that is woven into the DNA of this school.
Yeah.
This is how, and I think that this school almost becomes sort of like a microcosm of what is happening on a larger scale, that our kids are being indoctrinated. They are calling it education, but our kids really are not being educated, right? Because they're not even given the ability to think. They are being told what to think and then go live it out. And I want to go back to this clip from the Associated Press. Is the same student that's being interviewed. She's a student at Columbia University. And this is what she says about the purpose of education. Listen.
The university is essentially telling its students that we should learn about the movements of the past, but we shouldn't learn from them. But I do think that that's what education is for, right? It's to frame the way that you look at the world. It's to allow you to move through the world and act in accordance with morals and values that match the education that you've gotten thus far.
So the purpose of education is to frame the way that we look at the world. The purpose of education is to frame the way that we look at the world and to enable us to move through the world and sort of exercise that education that we have received. Do you know how powerful that is? Do you know, like, if that is true, right, then why would we entrust our kids to the state for their education? If education is that powerful, that it frames the way you look at the world, and that it has the ability to create radicals, ability to change the convictions of people, why would we entrust the education of our kids to just anybody?
Yeah, no, you're right about that. I think the thing is, maybe we don't truly understand the depth of what that is, of what's being said there. I think a lot of times we look at education through our eyes of being educated and feel like, oh, it wasn't that bad, but we don't really realize that we were being indoctrinated.
That's right.
But I think we feel like, oh no, it wasn't happening. No, there were things happening when we were in school. So I think that's just a ignorance, and maybe a willful ignorance, concerning what's happening in the educational system, and understanding that. But man, when it's broken down like this, we can't get away from it. Like, there's a responsibility on our part. When we hear information like this and we see what's going on, that man, there's an adjustment that needs to be made. And I think that's when the internal question we ask ourselves, like, man, like, what am I supposed to do, with this information that I know about what's happening, in the schools? This is what is happening. They're trying to indoctrinate our children. And they've been doing it for years and years and years, and so we have to make hard decisions. And I know we don't. There are many alternatives. There's some things that God has placed in our hands to do. There is ways to get away from that system, but we have to be in a place where we're not feeling like, I don't want to be inconvenienced, or this is too hard. These are hard matters, but we're going to have to do hard things.
Yeah, I think we've got to see it as worth it.
Yeah.
We've got to see it as worth it. When you understand that those who are wicked really understand the power of education, and they really understand, I guess, at a deeper level, the power and the effectiveness of influence, right? Like when you understand that you are not working with a haphazard or a blind enemy, that you've got a very intentional foe who hates the souls of men and wants foot soldiers on the journey. then I think you'll do something different. Before we go out of this particular episode, we wanted to share with you several quotes that are really just startling to think about, in light of education and the power of it. And so we want to share some of those quotes just as an encouragement and as a challenge that we've got to wake up and we've got to care not only about our kids, but we've got to care about the next generation of kids. So if you're a grandparent, man, don't rejoice that you're done. I would say humbly, but seriously, see yourself as not done.
Yeah.
See yourself as, I still got breath in my body. I still have the activity of my limbs. I've got the sincerity of my heart. And I've got the clarity of my mind that I can still help disciple the next generation. So I'm going to do everything that I can. I think this is something that the Lord has invited us into, and even commanded us that we would train our children, that we would equip our children. Before we share these quotes, though, I do want to take a moment to say thank you so much to all of our financial partners who make this podcast possible. I want to tell you how humbling it is that you have agreed to support us on a monthly basis. So many of you, it's been humbling to see the support come in without a request. You've gone to the website and I guess the Lord's moved on your heart. And I appreciate that. We are overwhelmed by the amount of support that we've received from our listeners.
Yes.
Thank you so much for what you're doing. Thank you. Because all of your financial support says, hey, keep making the podcast.
That's right. That's right.
So I just want to say thank you for that. Also want to say that if you're listening on Apple and you can leave a 5-star review, would you do that for us? It really does help us with the algorithm, helps us to stay on the radar of those who might be interested in this content. And then also, if you can leave a review, I know that takes extra work. That would also help us as well. Anything that you can do to help us continue growing this podcast, if you think it's worth it, we invite you to do that. You can learn more about our ministry and about what we are convinced that God has called us to do by going to cultureproof.net. That's cultureproof.net. Last thing I want to say is, if this is a blessing to you, any of the content that you ever hear, please share it with a friend.
That's right.
All right, those quotes.
Yes.
Is there anything before we go to the quotes?
Oh, I just want to, and when you go to cultureproof.net, make sure you subscribe to our newsletter.
Oh, yeah.
Subscribe to our newsletter. And of course, you can find us on social media at Facebook. You can find us on Instagram. You can find us on YouTube.
Look, let me just say this. Yes.
We out here.
YouTube. Okay. I know. So YouTube and Facebook. Instagram, we have gone kind of kicking and screaming. Okay.
We're there, but kind of.
So don't expect much. Okay. Because it's a platform that we're just trying to get into. We have ignored Instagram for a very long time. And so anyway, but we're there now, and we are trying to remember to post content there as well. But you just do a search for Culture Proof or Culture Proof Me. All of this information you'll find at cultureproof.net.
That's right. And
we'll be excited to connect with you on your preferred platform. Okay, so let's look at some of the ways that dictators of the past have revealed their hand and even taught us, I think, the value of children and the usefulness of children if they can be indoctrinated away from their parents. Here's Vladimir Lenin. He said, "Give me just one generation of youth and I'll transform the whole world." Give me just one generation of youth and I'll transform the whole world. Okay, here's another one from Lenin. "Give me your 4-year-old, and in a generation, I will build a socialist state." From the 4-year-old? It kind of makes it make sense now that they were like, okay, well, we need to start pre-K earlier and earlier.
Right.
Let's Head Start earlier and earlier. Like, how do we get kids away from their parents as soon as we humanly can? I mean, my goodness.
Right.
All right. So here's Joseph Stalin. Here's what he says. "Education is a weapon, the effect of which is determined by the hands which wield it, by who is to be struck down." So education is a weapon. And you think about it, it's like, okay, so if the dictators, right, the communists and the socialists are saying that education is a weapon that we're going to strike people down with, who are the people to be struck down? certainly
Yeah.
would be the people who would be resisting them, right? Here's a quote from Hitler. "Let me control the textbooks and I will control the state." Guys, this should all be very chilling to us. Another one from Hitler. "The state must declare the child to be the most precious treasure of the people. As long as the government is perceived as working for the benefit of the children, the people will happily endure almost any curtailment of liberty and almost any deprivation."
Wow.
Can you imagine taking our kids and using our love for our kids, the fact that we want the best for our kids, using that to destroy us, right? To entice us to be willing to give up some of our basic liberties. Do we see that happening in this country? I think we do. I
Yeah.
think we do see that happening. Here's another quote from Hitler. "When an opponent declares, 'I will not come over to your side,' I calmly say, 'Your child belongs to us already. What are you? You will pass on. Your descendants, however, now stand in the new camp. In a short time, they will know nothing else but this new community.'"
Mm.
That's the goal, right? That's the aim. Win the children, wait for the parents to die out. They play the long game. We have a hard time getting up in the morning. Finally, this one from Lenin. "Give me 4 years to teach the children, and the seed I have sown will never be uprooted." Isn't that interesting? Give me 4 years to teach the children. And we make so much of our liberal colleges and their 4-year degrees and what we get on the other side of that. We've got to show up to care. It's not enough for us to consume conservative content
That's right.
that mocks the kids who are protesting and they don't know why. I've seen some of the clips and they are concerning, right? But I think we can do more than that.
Yeah.
I think we can focus on where we are right now with what God has entrusted to us right now, okay? And train our children, help them to resist this culture and all of its trends that want to rival the truth. I mean, I know it does sound familiar, but that's the reality of where we are.
Yeah.
All right. This one is the last treat for you. I guess you could say it's a treat. But this is what we are dealing with in this world. And this clip is courtesy of Libs of TikTok, although I saw this on Instagram. And I just thought, oh, man. And, again, I took this as an opportunity to bring our 14-year-old son in and say, hey, I need you to watch this clip. And then I pulled out my little pocket constitution. I said, I just need you to read amendment number 1. Okay. And he was like, oh, whoa, this is bad. And so because the 14-year-old saw it pretty quickly and pretty easily, I think that you'll appreciate this as well. This is a woman who apparently is some type of educator, and she feels qualified to talk about the protests that are happening on college campuses across this country. Here we go.
I keep seeing this, and I think it's important to note that protests do not have to be peaceful. And I feel like the assertion in every publication that I see that the protests at college campuses across the country are peaceful, and the continued naming that they're peaceful feels like some level of objectivity there, like that is the right way to protest. Even if the protests were not peaceful, which I would argue a protest is never peaceful, that does not make them ineffective, right? If these protests move in the direction of not being peaceful, that does not mean that students now deserve to be arrested, right? That their First Amendment rights should be violated now that they are not peaceful, right? You don't have to be peaceful when you are fighting up against a violent regime.
Actually, yeah, you do. And none of what you just said makes any sense. Like, man, okay, so I'm not going to replay the clip. All I'm going to do is try to run a highlighter over what she said. So she basically is saying that when you communicate that a protest is peaceful, you are objectively saying that peaceful is preferred. Okay. Yeah. Like,
Right.
because peace
Right.
is better than chaos,
Yes.
right? Like it's
Yes.
better than violence. Okay. And then she is saying that when a protest isn't peaceful, she is saying it does not require or demand that there be a show of force for people to be arrested. Yeah, it does. Yeah, because when you echo, and she even says they violate their First Amendment rights. And that's the point at which I'm like, okay, JD, please, can you read Amendment number 1? Okay, so let me read it for you, our listeners. If you're watching over on YouTube, let me read this for you. So when someone says protests do not have to be peaceful, okay, that's actually in the amendment.
Right.
It's
supposed to be
in the
peaceful.
amendment. Okay, so here we go. Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof, or abridging the freedom of speech or of the press or of the right of the people peaceably to assemble and to petition the government for redress of grievances.
There you have it.
I don't, but let me just say, this is what we get when we take a step back from educating our young people. This is what we get. And this is what we will continue to get when we just boast that we have arrows, and rather than shoot them out with precision and excellence, basically you just pull them out of the quiver and just throw them out into the dark.
Yeah.
I mean, come on. What is the right expectation of God as it pertains to our children? When we resist the cultural trends that rival the truth, we remain culture proof. Until next time, Lord willing.
God bless.